Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching India Today Global. Now, anti-government protests continue in Iran for a 13th day in a row amid threats of a potential U.S. intervention. After U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to hit Iran very hard, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has dismissed protesters as a bunch of vandals trying to please Trump. Here is a report.
Frustration topped with fear, crippling economy, rampant inflation, and the threat of Trump locked, loaded, and ready to go. Anti-government demonstrations over economic hardship have engulfed Iran for almost 2 weeks. The protests were set off on December 28th in Tehran after a sharp slide in the Iranian currency. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has dismissed the protesters as a bunch of vandals, trying to please Trump, and warned the American president against fueling the unrest.
Last night in Tehran and some other places, a bunch of vandals showed up and destroyed buildings belonging to their own country, just to please the US president. Let him run his own country if he can. In his own country, there are all kinds of incidents going on. The Islamic Republic of Iran was established with the blood of several 100,000 honorable people, and it will not back down in the face of those who engage in destruction, nor will it tolerate mercenaries serving foreign powers.
در مقابل کسانی که تخریبگرند جمهوری اسلامی کوتاه نخواهد آمد.
Trump has threatened to hit Iran very hard if government forces kill protesters. But clashes between protesters and security personnel have already left dozens dead and over 2,200 detained. Iranian authorities have cut off access to the internet in a move to suppress the movement. The phone system also remains down, and airlines have cancelled flights in and out of the country. This crackdown is despite the president himself acknowledging the government's failings.
People are dissatisfied. We are at fault. You are at fault. Do not go after America as the one to blame. Do not go after. I don't know, some other person to blame. It is we who must serve, and they must be satisfied with us. It is we who must properly manage our resources. It is we who must make the effort and find solution to these problems for them.
Protesters dissatisfied with the regime are calling for the return of Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's former Shah, who was in the 1979 revolution. As the unrest persists, Pahlavi has called for more protests and urged Iran's armed forces to join the people.
This is a direct message addressed to Iran's armed and security forces. You, who wear a uniform to defend the Iranian nation and who are now facing a historic choice. In these decisive moments, I expect you to return to the embrace of the nation and to use your weapons not to fire at people, but to protect them.
While the US backs the protest, it has ruled out meeting with Reza Pahlavi, suggesting that in the event of a government collapse, Washington is not ready to back a successor in Tehran. So while Iranians call for internal change, Iran's leadership has its sights set on evading the threat of a foreign intervention as it tries to weather the unrest. Bureau Report, India Today.
I spoke with Iranian journalist from New York, Korosh Ziabari, and he spoke about the details of what's really happening on the ground. You can watch the entire interview on India Today Global's YouTube channel, but listen in to what he had to say about the regime's actions.
Hi, thanks very much for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity. Well, the protests are going on, and the crackdown has been, as far as I understand, violent as well. It seems that there is a disagreement on how to respond to the protests this time, because the administration in power, which is the president and his civilian government, apparently is in favor of some restraint and less violence. At the same time, the military, the armed forces, and the intelligence apparatus, which operate relatively independently of the government, are, of course, not in agreement, and they believe that they should resort to brute force in order to contain the uprising. But the question is whether or not this will be sustained, and whether or not protesters who are obviously frustrated with the economic situation and with the declining purchasing power and the increasing devaluation of the national currency will, continue to preserve the momentum, or will relent at some point.
Around 40 people have been killed, hundreds injured. Finally, the United States has decided to stop attack on Venezuela and restructure the country. Trump has announced the cancellation of second wave of attacks on Venezuela following the cooperation from South American nations. He claimed that Venezuela is releasing a large number of prisoners seeking peace, and Venezuela and US were working well together, and now the US administration will focus on rebuilding the nation. He further said that at least $100 billion will be invested by big oil companies, and he will be meeting with them at the White House.
We're meeting tomorrow with all of the big oil executives. We're going to be right here in the White House. We're going to meet with the biggest oil people in the world. They're all coming here. The top 14 companies are coming here. They're going to go in. They're going to rebuild the whole oil infrastructure. They're going to spend at least $100 billion.
Trump is also planning to meet Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, in the coming week. However, Trump's own senator has criticized Trump's move of attacking Venezuela.
There isn't anybody that has any information that the president is using armed forces against Venezuela. He did for about 47 minutes this last weekend, but he is not in the process of doing this. And the resolution says that he should stop it. It would be unconstitutional, unenforceable, but to tell him to not do something or to stop doing something he's not doing is nonsense.
But now another threat is possibly seen on Mexico. After Venezuela military operation and threatening Greenland and Colombia, is Trump planning to attack Mexico? In an interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity, Trump revealed that he is going to hit the Mexican land with regard to drug cartels. After seizing the Russia-flagged Marinera oil tanker on the 7th of January, the United States now has seized another oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea named Oilina. The sanctioned stateless vessel Oilina was seized overnight by the U.S. Coast Guard and Joint Task Force under the Operation Southern Spear. This is the fifth vessel targeted in recent weeks. As per information by public shipping database Equosis, the vessel was falsely flying the flag of Timor-Leste. As per an industry source, the Oilina was previously sailing from Venezuela and had returned to the origin. It left Venezuela last week, fully loaded with oil as part of flotilla, and was returning back to Venezuela following the U.S. blockade. The U.S. military has confirmed the seizure in a post on X, stating there is no safe haven for criminals. The post also stated that the Operation Southern Spear is a mission to eradicate illicit activities and restore security in Western Hemisphere. Now, in other developments, 2 Russian citizens are to be released now. The Ministry of External Affairs has stated in a post on X that U.S. is ready to release 2 Russian nations from the crew of the seized tanker Marinara. A fresh tariff storm is brewing between India and the United States of America. Howard Lutnick blames Prime Minister Modi for higher tariffs on India. Also, the U.S. sanctions bill against Russia threatens duties of up to 500% on countries buying Russian oil. As Washington's pressure tactics intensify, India has pushed back. Here's a report from Meenakshi Shandelia.
On Jan 6th, Donald Trump first said that Prime Minister Modi is not that happy with him because he imposed 50% tariff on India for its purchases of Russian oil.
I have a very good relationship with him. He's not that happy with me because you know, they're paying a lot of tariffs now because they're not doing the oil, but they are. They've now reduced it very substantially, as you know, from Russia.
And the next day, US Senator Lindsey Graham set off alarm bells. Graham Blumenthal sanctions bill drafted by Lindsey Graham, along with Democrat Richard Blumenthal. The bill, if passed, will allow President Trump to impose up to 500% tariff on countries buying Russian oil, warning of harsh trade penalties if purchases continue. The move was widely seen as aimed at India, one of the largest importers of discounted Russian crude, and marked a sharp escalation in Washington's pressure tactics. Amid the fallout, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has reignited a tariff war. In a podcast on January 8th, he claimed that a potential India-US trade deal failed to materialize because Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not call Trump. Lutnick said Trump was ready for negotiations, but the opportunity passed as the US moved ahead with other countries. Lutnick said the US had expected trade negotiations with India to move forward, but when there was no response from New Delhi, Washington went ahead and concluded deals with Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam instead.
So I would negotiate the contracts and set the whole deal up. But let's be clear, it's his deal.
Yeah.
Okay? He's the closer. He does the deal. So I said, you got to have Modi. It's all set up. You have to have Modi call the president. And they were uncomfortable doing it. So Modi didn't call.
Wow.
So that Friday left. In the middle of the next week, we did Indonesia, the Philippines, right? Vietnam. We announced a whole bunch of deals.
Malaysia in that period.
So we did these whole bunch of deals. So that's like...
that staircase.
And they were and because we negotiated them and assumed India was going to be done before them, I had negotiated them at a higher rate. So now the problem is the deals came out at a higher rate.
Right.
And then India calls back and says, oh, okay, we're ready. I said, ready for what? You know, it was like 3 weeks later. I go, are you ready for the train that left the station 3 weeks ago?
The tariff threats came at a sensitive time when India and the United States were still negotiating bilateral trade agreements, with multiple rounds of talks held through 2025 and plans for a framework to resolve existing tariffs still unresolved. Indian Ministry of External Affairs has responded to the tariff threat, stating that India is keeping an eye on the bill and it will prioritize the energy needs of its 1.4 billion people.
We are aware of the proposed bill. We are closely following the developments around the bill. Our position on the larger question of energy sourcing is well known to you. We are guided by the evolving dynamics in the global market, as also the imperative to secure affordable energy for our 1.4 billion people through diverse sources to meet their energy security needs.
In response to Howard Lutnick's claim, the MEA clarified that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called President Trump 8 times.
Prime Minister and President Trump have also spoken on phone on 8 occasions during 2025, covering different aspects of our wide-ranging partnership.
However, the tariff threat rattled Indian markets, with Dalal Street turning cautious and major indices slipping sharply. On January 8th, the Sensex plunged nearly 780 points, almost 1%, while the Nifty slid about 264 points as fears grow over punitive duties of up to 500%. Export-oriented shares saw heavy pressure and sentiment was dampened by foreign investors selling. While the talks remain formally open, the latest statements have added uncertainty for policymakers, businesses and markets on both sides. With Meenakshi Shandilya, Bureau Report, India Today.
And my colleague Rohit Sharma joins me from Washington, D.C. Rohit, thank you so much for joining me. It just seemed like India has made it very clear that the deal was nowhere near close, unlike what Lutnick said. Are Washington and Delhi far from aligned on what transpires when it comes to the trade talks?
I think both the governments are speaking from their perspective. I think Washington, I mean, if you watch the entirety of what Secretary Lutnick had to say, they had a plan. They wanted to announce these deals as soon as they can. They picked United Kingdom first, old allies, and were able to get a deal with them in 3 weeks, a record time. And this, he says, 3 Fridays. And I think that was the kind of thing they were pushing with India too. So I think America was ready to make a deal on its own terms, while India probably did not want to make that deal. Had Indian red lines not been crossed, I'm pretty sure, if India was happy with what was proposed by the American side, India would have happily signed that deal. So I think there is some sense of negotiation that India wanted to have after what it was presented with initially. And that could be a reason why the Indian side did not think it was important to do a follow-up or call, as Secretary Lutnick has said, that the call did not come through.
Well, the opinion on the 500% tariff against India has not come through. We're waiting for that. But how worried should India and Indian exporters be about the Graham bill?
Well, I think, we've got to look at it in two different ways here. First, the bill is a pressure tactic. It was introduced May of last year, and 500% tariff is a shocker to countries that are importing oil from Russia, and try to have them put pressure on the Russia, an acknowledgement in a way in Washington D.C., especially by Lindsey Graham in the Senate, that India and China can put pressure on Russia to end the war. That's number one. Number two, what this bill does, and I've been told by people in Washington, D.C., that the 500% tariff number is an arbitrary number now. The text of the bill that will be hopefully passed, it would be different. It would give discretionary power to the President of the United States to put tariffs by issuing orders, essentially at the whim of the president, if he wants to go by 10%, 15%, 25%. So it would be a range that the bill would have, that president will have the authority to then put tariffs.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. I mean, people would be worried.
Right, Rohit. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep tracking developments on that front. We'll keep coming back to you. Now, a deadly federal immigration operation has ignited outrage across the Minneapolis region. The fatal shooting of a U.S. citizen by an ICE agent in Minneapolis has triggered mass protests and sharp political clashes, with the Trump administration defending the action while local leaders demanding accountability. Here's a report by Meenakshi Shandalia.
They arrested my brother. He's a U.S. citizen. He was working at Target.
I'm just really upset that this is happening in America. We got people that are dying, that are dead. We got others that are getting kidnapped.
No! No!
On January 7th, 2026, 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a Minneapolis resident and U.S. citizen, was fatally shot by U.S. Federal Home Security (ICE) agent during a federal immigration enforcement operation in South Minneapolis, near Poland Avenue, just a few blocks from her home. Following the killing, mass protests erupted across Minneapolis and other U.S. cities. On Thursday morning, January 8th, protesters gathered outside the Whipple Federal Building, where tensions escalated. Federal officers in riot gear lined up outside the building. They pushed into the crowd, threw several protesters to the ground, made at least 2 arrests, and deployed chemical irritants. Protesters chanted shame as arrests were made. Federal authorities later retreated and formed a human wall to protect the building. The FBI assumed exclusive control of the investigation, barring Minnesota state investigators from accessing evidence, deepening federal-state tensions. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz criticized the move, demanding greater transparency and state involvement.
We do not need any further help from the federal government. To Donald Trump and Kristi Noem, you've done enough. There's nothing more important than Minnesotan safety. I've issued a warning order to prepare the Minnesota National Guard. We have soldiers in training and prepared to be deployed if necessary. I remind you, a warning order is a heads up for folks. And these National Guard troops are our National Guard troops. They're teachers in your community, they're business owners, they're construction professionals. They are Minnesotans. Minnesota will not allow our community to be used as a prop in a national political fight.
It was a very difficult day yesterday. I'll start with that.
Minneapolis Council member Jason Chavez has called for arrest of ICE agents.
They need to be arrested. They need to be fired and held accountable. And anybody that watched that murder needs to be put on trial as well. Because this happened blocks away from the murder of George Floyd. And our city will not take anything less than that. They need to be fired immediately and they need to be arrested. And the city needs to be doing everything that it can to step in and help.
Minnesota is a train wreck.
Federal officials, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Noem and President Donald Trump, defended the shooting, claiming Good had weaponized a vehicle and attempted to run over an agent, prompting the use of deadly force.
I would say that when these individuals use their vehicles to try to ram our law enforcement and to put their lives in jeopardy, that law enforcement officer has to make a decision to protect his life and the individuals around him as well.
However, videos circulating online and eyewitness accounts appear to contradict this version, showing a vehicle turning away and driving off before shots were fired, with witnesses stating she posed no immediate threat. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey has also rejected the Trump administration's claim that the agents fired in self-defense. He claimed that the federal officers were responsible for creating chaos in the city.
I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite.
Renee Good's death has become a symbol of outrage over federal enforcement tactics, reviving national debates on use of force, immigration enforcement, federal authority, and civil rights. Minneapolis, already a focal point in America's policing debate, now finds itself once again at the center of a national controversy. With Meenakshi Shandelia, Bureau Report, India Today.
Well, that's all on this edition of India Today Global. Thank you for watching. News and updates will continue on the other side. Goodbye and take care.